there is something wrong with our clocks. And I do not mean that in a poetic way. I am not talking about the pace of modern life, or how the weekends vanish too quickly, or some vague spiritual exhaustion people like to gesture at when they say time feels broken. I mean something far more literal than that. Structural, mechanical, demonstrable. Something is off. And the more closely I looked, the more it began to feel less like an accident and more like the result of design. Start with the simplest version of the problem. Every spring, we move our clocks forward. Every autumn, we move them back. We call it daylight saving time. It has been done for so long in so many places that it feels almost natural now, as if it belongs in the same category as sunrise, tides, and seasons. As if shifting the hands on a clock were somehow part of the Earth's own behavior. As if light itself needed official permission to arrive at a different hour. As if time were something governments could edit. At first that sounds like a boring complaint, a seasonal annoyance. But stay with me, because daylight saving time is not ancient. It is not some deep inheritance from the earliest days of civilization. It was proposed in 1895 by a New Zealand entomologist named George Vernon Hudson, a man who wanted more daylight after work so he could collect insects. That is the official beginning of a practice that now shapes the daily rhythm of over 1 billion people. And when it was adopted more widely during the First World War, it was not done for farmers. Despite the myth that keeps getting repeated, it was done to save coal, to support industry, to keep the machinery of war and production moving efficiently. And the deeper I went, the clearer it became that this was not an isolated adjustment. It was one move in a much longer sequence, a chain of replacements, one system laid over another, each change slowly erasing something older, something more local, more organic, more deeply tied to the actual conditions of human life. Something that, for centuries, and maybe much longer, had kept human beings aligned with something larger than a schedule. Which raises the obvious question. Before all of this, what were people actually synchronized with? Here is a detail that rarely appears in the usual history books. Before 1847, every city in England kept its own time. Not roughly, not symbolically, precisely. Bristol's solar noon came about 10 minutes after London's because Bristol lies farther west. So Bristol kept Bristol time. Norwich kept Norwich time. Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh. Each place followed the sun as it actually appeared in that sky, over that piece of land. This was not considered backward. It was not seen as disorderly or primitive. It was simply accurate. Time reflected where you were. Then the railways arrived. The Great Western Railway began using London time in 1840. Other railway lines followed. And by 1847, the Railway Clearinghouse had recommended that all British railways adopt Greenwich Mean Time. Not because nature changed, not because the sun suddenly behaved differently, but because trains required uniformity. A network of iron tracks could not easily tolerate hundreds of local versions of noon. The needs of the machine overruled the sky. The official story calls this progress, and to be fair, it was efficient. It did make coordination easier. It did help organize a rapidly industrializing country. But that explanation hides something important. It assumes the thing being replaced was flawed. It assumes local solar time was a limitation. But what if it was not a limitation at all? What if it was information? When your body wakes with the actual dawn, the dawn that belongs to your longitude, your season, your latitude, something happens that does not happen when an alarm goes off at the same numerical time every day of the year, no matter what the light is doing outside. Your endocrine system responds to real light. Cortisol rises along a real gradient. Hunger, alertness, sleep pressure, energy, all of it is shaped by signals older than civilization itself. These systems did not evolve to obey a standardized administrative grid. They evolved to track the real sun. We did not just change our clocks. We changed our relationship with light, and the railways were only the beginning. In 1884, representatives from 25 nations gathered in Washington, D.C. for the International Meridian Conference. There, the world was divided into 24 time zones, and Greenwich was established as the prime meridian. In less than half a century, humanity's temporal relationship with the Earth was reorganized around a single reference point in a London suburb. Think about how extraordinary that really is. A relationship built over millennia, embedded in culture, biology, architecture, ritual, and daily life, was dismantled and replaced in just a few decades. Swiftly, enthusiastically, almost completely. And once you begin to notice that, older evidence starts to look different. Stand in Prague's Old Town Square and look up at the astronomical clock mounted on the southern wall of the Old Town Hall. It has been running in one form or another since 1410. Most visitors notice the moving figures first, the apostles, the skeleton, the theatrical little procession on the hour. It looks decorative. It looks medieval in the way modern people often use that word, meaning charming, but impractical. But that clock is not decoration. It tells you the hour, yes. But it also tells you the position of the sun and moon in the zodiac, the current lunar phase, the time of sunrise and sunset for that specific day, calculated for Prague's actual location. It shows Babylonian time, Old Czech time, and Central European time all at once. 3 systems on a single face, displayed side by side, as if the builders understood that time was not one simple thing, as if a person might need several different kinds of temporal knowledge at once. That is not ornamental thinking. That is a worldview. The Prague clock is not unique. Venice's Torre dell'Orologio, completed in 1499, tracks lunar phases and the sun's movement through the zodiac as essential information. Strasbourg Cathedral's astronomical clock, in its 3rd major version completed in 1843, includes a perpetual calendar, planetary displays, eclipse indicators, and automata marking the hours. It was finished only 40 years before global time standardization made the very philosophy behind it feel obsolete. And it was not just those 3. Gdansk, Lund, Olomouc, Bern, Wells Cathedral, the Zimmer Tower in Belgium. Across Europe, city after city built clocks that did much more than tell people when to arrive somewhere. These were not modern clocks. They were observatories in public view, mechanical calendars, interfaces between human life and celestial cycles, and nearly all of them shared the same underlying assumption. Time is cyclical, lunar, solar, seasonal, rooted in motions larger than politics and older than empire. The modern clock gives you almost none of that. It counts forward from midnight. That is all. It tells you nothing about where the sun is, what the moon is doing, how long the day has become, or where you stand in the wider rhythm of the year. It strips time down to a neutral sequence, portable, standardized, detached from place. And then came the next major break. In 1916, in the middle of the First World War, Germany became the first country to implement daylight saving time nationally. The official reason was fuel conservation. Move the workday forward in summer, use less artificial light in the evening, save coal for the war. Britain followed within weeks. France followed. Then many of the countries involved in the war did the same. But when the war ended, daylight saving time did not simply disappear. In some places, it was abandoned. In others, it returned. In others, it was modified, suspended, reinstated, argued over, regionally fragmented, politically weaponized. The history of DST across the 20th century is so messy that it almost stops looking like rational planning and starts looking like improvisation built around priorities that were never really about human well-being in the first place. In the United States, the story became especially absurd. It was adopted during World War I, dropped afterward, brought back during World War II, then handed over to state-level decisions in ways that created total confusion. By the 1960s, there were bus routes where a traveler could cross multiple time changes in the span of a short trip. 7 time changes in 35 miles. Does that sound like a coherent system? Does that sound like the clean product of reason? Or does it sound like a structure bent around industry, commerce, scheduling, and control, regardless of what it does to the human body? Because the original promise begins to fall apart the moment you examine it. The coal-saving argument for daylight-saving time has been studied again and again, across countries and across decades. And the results are underwhelming at best. In many cases, the energy savings are negligible. In some cases, overall consumption may even rise. So if it does not really save energy, then what exactly does it do? What it does, measurably and repeatedly, is disrupt sleep. That part is not speculative. It is one of the few pieces of this entire story that has been studied in painstaking modern detail. In the days right after the spring clock change, researchers have documented increases in heart attacks, traffic accidents, workplace injuries, and psychiatric distress. The body does not smoothly absorb the sudden shift. It does not politely adjust because a law says it should. Human physiology, tuned over evolutionary time to real cycles of light and darkness, does not instantly accept the idea that morning has been moved by decree. And yet, every year it happens again. That persistence is revealing. Because when a system produces documented harm, weak benefits, and widespread confusion, but continues anyway, you have to ask a different kind of question. Not why does it remain, but what function does it actually serve? Maybe the disruption is not an unfortunate side effect. Maybe disruption itself is useful inside a system that values compliance, coordination, and productivity over human rhythm. And if that sounds too dramatic, then consider what was replaced. Take the Antikythera mechanism. It was recovered in 1901 from a Roman-era shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. For decades, it sat corroded and misunderstood. Just another strange object pulled from the sea. Only later, especially with advanced imaging in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, did its significance become clear. What researchers found was staggering. A compact mechanical computer, built around 150 BC, capable of predicting the positions of the sun and moon, tracking lunar phases, forecasting eclipses, and mapping long astronomical cycles all at once. It encoded the Metonic cycle, the 235-month sequence after which solar and lunar calendars realign. It accounted for the Saros cycle, the roughly 18-year rhythm used to predict eclipses. It linked celestial movement to the timing of major games. It did all of this using bronze gears, precise ratios, and an engineering sophistication that modern scholars were slow to even believe was possible. The standard explanation says it was an anomaly, a brilliant one-off, a miracle of Hellenistic ingenuity that somehow left no meaningful descendants. But that explanation raises as many questions as it answers. Because technologies like that do not appear out of nowhere. Someone designed it, someone machined it, someone understood enough astronomy, mathematics, and mechanics to bring it into physical form. That means there was knowledge behind it, probably a community of knowledge, perhaps a tradition. So, what happened to that tradition? Why do we keep being told that ancient sophistication was isolated whenever it appears inconveniently advanced? Why is the pattern always the same? A civilization tracks celestial cycles with precision. It builds instruments around that precision. Then later, history treats the achievement as a curiosity rather than evidence of a lost framework. Look at the Jantar-Mantar observatories in India. There are 5 major complexes built between 1724 and 1735 by Maharaja Jai Singh II. These were not small scientific devices placed on tables. They were architectural instruments, giant stone observatories, sundials with gnomons reaching roughly 90 feet, capable of astonishing accuracy. Structures designed to measure celestial altitude, solstices, equinoxes, declinations, and time itself in relation to the actual sky. Jai Singh did not build them as decorative monuments. He built them because he believed the existing astronomical tables available to him were not accurate enough. That is the part that should make you stop. Here was an 18th century ruler dissatisfied with inherited precision, commissioning instruments on the scale of buildings in order to refine the measurement of celestial cycles. What exactly was important enough to demand that level of accuracy? Across the ocean, the pattern appears again. Mesoamerican civilizations oriented major structures around astronomical events with a degree of intention that modern summaries often flatten into vague admiration. At Chichen Itza, the Caracol Tower is aligned in ways associated with Venus observation. El Castillo is designed so that during the equinoxes, light and shadow create the illusion of a serpent moving down the staircase. At Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Sun is positioned with solar alignments that are too exact to dismiss as coincidence, not approximately, precisely. And when ancient builders across disconnected civilizations keep doing the same kind of thing, the official story becomes harder to hold together. We are told these alignments were symbolic, ceremonial, religious, and perhaps they were. But that answer often feels less like an explanation and more like a way of closing the file. Because symbolism does not exclude function. Ritual does not exclude observation. In many older civilizations, the sacred and the practical were not separate categories at all. Then there is the calendar. Because if something was done to the clock, then something was also done to the calendar. And here the evidence becomes even stranger. The Gregorian calendar, which governs almost every deadline, school year, appointment, tax cycle, and work schedule in modern life, is a deeply irregular system. Months of 28, 29, 30, and 31 days, arranged in a pattern so inconsistent that children are still taught tricks with their knuckles just to remember which is which. February contracts, then expands. Weeks do not align neatly with months. Months do not divide the year cleanly. Quarters are uneven. The system works, obviously, but it does not feel elegant. It feels patched together. And that might not matter if there were no coherent alternative, but there is. Imagine a calendar of 13 months, each with exactly 28 days. 13 times 28 gives you 364. That is exactly 52 weeks. Exactly 4 7-day weeks per month. Every month begins on the same weekday. Every quarter has the same structure. Then add 1 day outside the monthly count, a threshold day, a year day, and the solar year is complete. In leap years, add a second intercalary day. Suddenly the entire system becomes symmetrical, predictable, and easy to inhabit. This was not some fringe fantasy invented by modern reformers. Variations of this structure appear again and again in older civilizations. The ancient Egyptians used 12 30-day months plus 5 epigomenal days outside the regular count. Many lunar systems tracked 13 cycles within the solar year. Cultures across continents, from parts of Africa to the Americas to pre-Roman Britain, preserved calendrical thinking built around repeated natural cycles rather than the awkward administrative pattern we now treat as normal. And the reason that matters is not because 13 is mystical. It is because 13 lunar cycles fit surprisingly well into a solar year. The number 28 is close to the visible cycle of the moon. It is also close to recurring biological rhythms in the human body. The system is not arbitrary. It is observational. It is biological. It is astronomical, which makes the modern arrangement look less inevitable and more imposed. The deeper I went into this, the more I found not only replaced systems, but traces of those systems still living inside us. Human beings carry a circadian rhythm in every cell of the body. That is not metaphor. It is physiology. The suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus responds to light entering the eyes and helps synchronize hormones, temperature, digestion, immunity, and sleep with the real solar day. Not with time zones, not with Greenwich, not with a work schedule that says the day starts at 9, even when the sun has barely risen. The body still runs on local solar information, and for most of human history, daily life was built around that fact. People woke near dawn, worked in daylight, slept in darkness. Not because they lacked sophistication, but because the biological system demanded alignment with the world as it actually was. Rhythm was not a lifestyle preference. It was the organizing principle. And once you start looking at older records, you find something else. Modernity barely knows how to talk about it. Pre-industrial sleep itself may have followed a different pattern. Historians studying diaries, court documents, and medical texts from medieval and early modern Europe keep encountering references to what is now called segmented sleep. People often slept in two phases, with a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night. They referred to first sleep and second sleep as if this were perfectly ordinary. Not insomnia, not a disorder, a normal human pattern. So maybe we did not just lose a different calendar. Maybe we lost a different relationship to darkness, to rest, to the structure of the night itself. Maybe the body still remembers an older timing, even while the official schedule insists otherwise. And that is where this stops being just a story about clocks and starts becoming something much more unsettling. Because if the body remembers, then the replacement was never total. I do not know what time it is. Not really. I know what my phone says. I know what the clock on the wall says. I know that at certain points in the year, I will be told to move those numbers forward or backward. And I know that researchers will publish studies about what that does to the human body. And I know most people will barely notice beyond being tired for a few days. Then the adjustment will settle in. Life will continue. Meetings will happen. Trains will run. Deadlines will remain deadlines. And after a week or two, most of us will forget there was ever a different hour. But I keep coming back to those older systems. I keep coming back to the Prague clock with its layered face and its simultaneous realities. I keep coming back to Jai Singh building observatories the size of architecture, because existing measurements were not good enough. I keep coming back to the Antikythera mechanism, to a bronze machine from 2,000 years ago that knew how to follow eclipses and lunar cycles with a sophistication that should have permanently changed how we talk about the ancient world. I keep coming back to the quiet fact that across multiple civilizations, on multiple continents, people kept building instruments to track the sky with extraordinary seriousness. What were they watching? That is the question I cannot shake. Because when the same pattern appears over and over again, it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like a memory. A memory not just stored in artifacts, but embedded in architecture, agriculture, ritual, and the body itself. Ancient and medieval cultures did not treat time as a thin strip of numbered hours, flowing abstractly from one appointment to the next. They treated it as layered, rhythmic, local, celestial. They assumed that the position of the sun mattered, that the phase of the moon mattered, that the turning of seasons and the recurrence of longer cycles mattered enough to be tracked carefully, publicly, and continuously. We, by contrast, live inside a model of time that is astonishingly flat. It is efficient, yes. Portable, yes. Useful for coordination, absolutely. But it is also profoundly reductive. The modern clock tells you almost nothing except how late you are. The modern calendar tells you almost nothing except what you owe. Both are stripped of context. They no longer place you inside a living sky. They place you inside a schedule. And once you see that, a lot of other modern habits start to look less natural than they first appeared. For example, the body's dependence on artificial cues. We now rely on alarms to wake up, reminders to eat, blue light filters to sleep, productivity systems to divide our days, digital calendars to tell us what week it is, and health apps to tell us when our bodies are tired. We outsource temporal awareness to machines because the surrounding culture has been reorganized in a way that makes direct awareness harder to maintain. We live under lights that ignore sunset. We work under ceilings that erase the sky. We move through weeks that do not align cleanly with anything biological, lunar, or solar. And then we wonder why people feel vaguely unmoored. Maybe that feeling is not vague at all. Maybe what many people experience as fatigue, disorientation, burnout, seasonal confusion, and chronic temporal stress is not simply the cost of being busy. Maybe it is the cost of being pushed out of rhythm. Not out of some mystical rhythm, but out of measurable alignment with the conditions under which human beings evolved. Local sunrise, darkness, seasonal variation, cyclical change, variation in day length, variation in sleep timing. All the things older cultures treated as facts of life rather than obstacles to productivity. And I think that is why the historical replacements matter. Because they were not neutral upgrades. They solved specific problems for specific systems. Railways needed synchronization. Factories needed labor discipline. Governments needed administrative regularity across large populations. Empires needed common reference points. Commerce needed predictability. War needed coordination. From that perspective, local solar time was messy. Lunar time was messy. Seasonal flexibility was messy. A human being who measured the day by the sun and the month by the moon was harder to standardize, harder to mobilize, harder to schedule, harder to command. The synchronized clock solved that beautifully. And once it did, the older systems could be dismissed as quaint, primitive, decorative, ceremonial, mystical, irrational, anything except what they may actually have been. Sophisticated ways of remaining oriented inside the larger cycles of the world. That does not mean every ancient system was perfect. It does not mean every older culture possessed some hidden truth we have completely lost. It does not mean we should abandon modern timekeeping and go back to sundials tomorrow. That would be absurd. But it does mean the official story of progress becomes less convincing the closer you look. Because the story usually goes like this. Older timekeeping was imprecise, local, fragmented, superstitious. Modern timekeeping is accurate, universal, rational. Case closed, except it is not closed. Because some of the older systems were astonishingly precise. Some were more information-rich than what replaced them. Some were more aligned with biology. Some were more mathematically elegant. Some were more attentive to the sky, to the moon, to recurring natural cycles, to the lived reality of being a creature on a rotating planet. And what replaced them was not simply greater truth. It was greater uniformity. Those are not the same thing. Uniformity is useful, sometimes necessary. But it also has a cost. It asks different places to pretend they are the same. It asks different bodies to pretend they adapt identically. It asks dawn in one longitude to be treated as equivalent to dawn in another. It asks the body to obey the schedule rather than the light. It asks the year to be divided for convenience, not coherence. And because we are born into that system, we rarely notice how strange it is, until something small cracks it open. A missed hour of sleep in March. A winter morning where work begins before sunrise for weeks on end. A feeling of jet lag without travel. The odd relief of waking naturally with dawn while on vacation. The shock of seeing an old astronomical clock and realizing that people once expected a public instrument to tell them not just the hour, but where the sun stood, what the moon was doing, what season they were inhabiting, where they were in the larger pattern. That realization changes the scale of the question. Because then the question is no longer just, why do we still do daylight saving time? The question becomes, what kind of human being does this system produce? A person told what time it is, rather than a person who knows how to locate themselves within time. A person synchronized to institutions before they are synchronized to place. A person adapted to abstraction. And maybe that is the shape of the thing. Not a grand conspiracy with a single mastermind. Not a secret cabal hiding the moon from you. Something more ordinary and more powerful than that. A long historical process in which systems built for industry, empire, administration, and coordination gradually overwrote systems built around celestial observation, local reality, and biological rhythm. Not lost through neglect alone, replaced because replacement served power. And yet the replacement is incomplete. That may be the most important part. The body has not fully forgotten. The circadian system still reads actual light. Hormones still respond to day length. Sleep still shifts with darkness. Seasonal mood still changes when sunlight changes. The body is still, in some deep way, operating on the older model. It still expects reality, even when society offers only schedule. That is why the old clocks matter to me. The one in Prague, the one in Strasbourg, the giant instruments in Jaipur, the broken gears from Antikythera. They feel less like relics and more like messages from a worldview that understood time differently. Not as a line to be managed, but as a field to be inhabited. Somewhere, in the lower chambers of an old cathedral, a clock is still turning, still following the moon, still marking the sun, still doing exactly what it was built to do in a world that had already begun forgetting why any of that mattered. The clock still knows. The question is whether we do.